Hi, thank you very much for the warm welcome, and I mean the warm literally. It's quite warm. Uh, I was happy when I got into the talk room today because usually when the speakers talk, there's a lot of hot air, and everybody kind of stays outside. Today it's so hot out there that I hope you all stay in the nice air conditioning and enjoy my talk. So the last time I was in Brisbane for YOW was 5 years ago. And back then I gave a talk about mistakes and patterns about feature flagging and feature management. So just to level set, when I first started speaking in Australia, I felt like I was trying to, I'd say, plant the seed of why feature flagging was good and why people should use it. And every time I come back, I'm very pleasantly pleased that people are no longer asking me, like, what's a feature flag? So just as a show of hands, how many people are already using some sort of feature flagging and feature management? Great. How many people are kind of new to it but just getting started? All right. So I'll try to calibrate my talk somewhere in the middle so people who are using them pretty frequently and some people who are new. So to start off, the title of my talk is All the World is a Staging Server. And this is a riff on a Shakespeare play, As You Like It, where he talks about, every person has their place to play in life. You start off as as an infant, and then you exit and enter a stage, which to me is kind of similar to a feature. So my own background is I started off in engineering. I have some patents on delegated admin, and then I was a product manager. And from that, I saw the same patterns over and over and over about a feature lifecycle. You have a plan, you design, you develop, you test, you ship, and then you maintain and you sunset a feature. And from a lot of the things that I'd seen in my own time as an engineer and as a product manager, I got really into feature management. I thought that there was a better way to build software with less risk, more control, and getting value to customers quicker. So 10 years ago, I co-founded LaunchDarkly. As you heard, we have 5,000 customers worldwide, and we serve trillions of features, trillions with a T, every day, and many, many, many customers worldwide. And I will add here, even if you're not a LaunchDarkly customer, though I sincerely hope you might be, I just hope that you use feature flags and feature management as a best practice. So this is not a vendor talk of you have to use LaunchDarkly to be effective. I do think we can help, but I think if you just use any of these patterns that I'm talking about, you'll be in a better place. All right, so I'm going to start by talking about how you can use feature management throughout the entire life cycle of a feature. Usually what happens when I say that I co-founded a company around feature flagging, I either get, what the hell is a feature flag? And then I can explain that. Or you mean A/B testing? They say yes, but it's so much more. Or yes, or is this an on-off switch? And I say yes, but it's so much more. So you can use feature flagging even from the very beginning of when you're thinking about a feature. So to compare, an early feature is just really an infant. So this is a line from Shakespeare. At first, the infant mewling and puking. So you have this idea. And I say your product manager has an idea, and it's just an idea. And you might say, well, why do I need a feature flagging now? I should just go start coding. It's actually really powerful if before you even launch a feature, if you have just a feature flag concept. So when I was a product manager at TripIt's a travel app, we would do this a lot. We would have an idea for some sort of feature, and we would put a button on our app to see if anybody pushed it. So there was nothing behind it. If somebody did push it, we would say, like, coming soon or sign up for a beta. And I, as a product manager, love this. If nobody ever pushed that button, that was a sign. And sometimes the sign was that the world was not ready for what we were building. Sometimes the sign was that I needed a better name for it. Sometimes the sign was I needed to go talk to my boss and say, hey, boss, before we go even further, we should talk about this feature because nobody seems to want to use it. So this is the very, very, very earliest stage of a feature. Because if you can stop a feature from being built, and save yourself a lot of time that's actually extremely valuable. All right, say you got past this. Say you have a feature that seems to be attractive to users. You've done some very basic testing. Now you're in design and prototype. And again, this is from Shakespeare, creeping like a snail, unwilling to school. This is something where you might wrap the feature, again in a feature flag, and start showing it internally. The old way of doing stuff was to have a lot of paper mockups. That is of some use, but really you need to have something that people can react to. So if you have some sort of prototype where you can, again, feature flag it and start giving use to different people, you get really valid feedback very quickly. And the advantage of doing this is that you have full control over who you can show it to. You could, for example, say, I'm just going to show it to this other department. I could just show it to these very friendly beta users. Or I could just show it to this other company who we're collaborating with. So a common pattern that we see people using feature flags for is originally people were really just using them for UE-based features. Now with microservices, people often want to get exposure from not just the way it looks, but the way it behaves. So if you have an early feature, which is, for example, an API integration with another internal or external partner, you can feature flag it and give them access and see what's actually happening. Again, the key part here is that this isn't always just a prototype. It might just be the actual code that's live and you're giving people access to. All right, you've gotten some powerful feedback. This is something that you want to move forward with. Other internal, external consumers say go. And this is BTS. They are, I'd say, the teenagers, because they're kind of the prototypical teenagers. Singing like a furnace with a woeful ballad. That's the Shakespeare line. How I interpret that is you've gotten all these early signals of success, and now what you really want to do is start building it out. And again, this is a time when you want to get more and more and more feedback. So you can start to, with a feature, start to ungate it more and more to different departments. If it's a microservice, you can start to give more and more full access. And again, have something that's more and more fully baked, even in development. Again, you might say, well, this seems really dangerous. We should really do all our testing before we expose anything. And in fact, a common knock against feature flagging is, well, you're not doing testing. I think what's really happening here is that there's hopefully some sort of very rapid interchange about internal and external testing. I would never say just throw something out for everybody to look at. You as a developer should, of course, be doing testing internally. You should be verifying. But the sooner you can get it into the hands of other people, the better off you'll be. So I'm an American, so I'll say up front, do people know who this is, who Maverick is? OK, good. So Maverick, if you don't know him, was in this Top Gun movie that came out about 20 years ago. And his whole, one of his famous lines was, you're writing checks that you can't cash. Basically, when you've built this prototype, you put it into development, and now you're getting out into the real world, now is really, you really want to start doing some performance and scalability tests. And the old way of doing this before feature flagging was incredibly tricky and brittle. So when I started in development about 20 years ago, we would have a performance box where we would just set something up and then have the performance team try to hammer at it. We had a good performance team and we caught most issues. The real problem was, however, that whatever tests we had in our performance box were not always the same as the real world. Particularly if we were using external systems, and again, I go back to if you're interfacing with other financial systems, other mainframes, other systems where you can't really do a stub. When you push it out to production, all of a sudden that's when the real performance testing works. The joke is always some people are fortunate enough to have a staging in production, they might just not know which is which. So with feature flagging and feature management, you can put something out online and do real performance testing. And I don't say just push something out and cross your fingers and see what's happening. You can do stuff like you can have rings of development. So a best practice is to put something out and start to ramp up from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4% and see how something performs under load. And of course, if something starts to break, you can always just turn it back off. A real world example that has happened pretty recently this past July was CrowdStrike. How many people know about the CrowdStrike outage? All right. So feature flagging would not have fixed everything here, but it would have helped. So everything I'm going to talk about is based on public knowledge. CrowdStrike did a really good breakdown of what had happened on their side, because basically what had happened was they'd shipped something that did pretty much the worst bug you could think of. It didn't just fail their own CrowdStrike viral software. What it did was give the dreaded blue screen of death. And the dreaded blue screen of death is for a Microsoft machine when it is just flashing a blue screen. It's pretty much as described. What had happened was that they made a decision, which was if you're attacking viruses, it's better to patch quickly and get every fix out as quickly as you can and just ship it everywhere. Unfortunately, they had a latent bug where they had different templates, and fixes were successfully going out until a fix went out that triggered this latent bug and caused a blue screen of death. And it impacted air travel. It impacted groceries. It impacted everything you could think of that might have CrowdStrike. Would better feature flagging have stopped this bug? I'm not sure. It was at a kernel level that's a little bit above or below, depending on how you look at a kernel, my level of expertise. However, what a better feature flagging practice could have done is if they'd rolled it out to 1, 2, 3%, and then looked at the reaction of their customers, they could have easily and quickly found out that this was a catastrophic issue. There's multiple ways you could do this. You can look at the health of the systems you're pushing it out to. You could look at customer support tickets. You could monitor. We have some customers who just monitor tweets, or you could have some sort of observability and look at spikes in traffic. But whatever it is, there should be some sort of system where you say, okay, this is going out to 1 and 2% of people, and they're catastrophically unhappy. Let's stop it right now. Does that help that 1%? Not really, not always. But you, in return, have helped the other 98% from having this issue. CrowdStrike, to their credit, when they did start getting reports that this was a bad issue, they did stop deployments, but it wasn't an automated process. It was something they were doing manually. Another thing, and again, this is public, you can look at CrowdStrike's own write-up, is a best practice of opt-in, opt-out for when you get a release. So you could say, here are some users that are kind of, I call them the eager beta people. You know, they want the early software, they want it now, just give it to them. The middle, who's like, okay, we want stuff when we want it. And I call them the late adopters. And the late adopters, for various business, regulation, or whatever reasons, want something as late as possible. And there's a lot of reasons, as I said, regulatory or otherwise, why you might want something as late as possible. For example, if you're in the medical field, you don't really want an early release. You want something that's been tested. You could also have air-gapped machines where it's a pain to update something, so you might voluntarily opt into that. So a best practice in testing is to not think about as testing as just something that you do internally. Of course you want to do internally. You never want to just ship stuff without testing it. But testing as an iterative, collaborative process with external users and getting feedback along the way. Before I go on, any questions about this phase? Okay, I'll have some questions at the end. Shipped live. So this is the Chief Justice of Australia who just stepped down. This is the phase of a feature where it's live. And the justice is somebody who's weighing issues, who's weighing whether something is good or bad. My analogy for this is A/B testing. So A/B testing, I'd say, is actually very powerful if you have a feature where you are building it because you want to see if it actually behaves better or worse. So there's some classic examples of this. If you have a new registration flow and you want to make sure that more people are registering, if you have a new checkout, if you're in e-commerce. There's also, I'd say, even more powerful A/B testing, which is if you have a major release, if you want to make sure that it still works. Example that just happened to this is Sonos, which is an entertainment company. They shipped a major new release that everybody hates. It's kind of universally, if you look at the message boards, it's hated. And their response is, it's too late. We shipped the new one, you can't go back. So a really good best practice if you're making a bet the company type move like that is to have some sort of A/B. This is really painful if you're, again, on the development side of I've spent all this time and everybody hates it. But it's much better to have this feedback of A/B of like, okay, everybody hates the new version, why? And then have this safety valve of going back to the safe version while you figure it out. A mistake I myself made in the past when I was at TripIt, we had a print. So we had this very nice travel app where you could get your itinerary. And we also had on the website a print button where you could get a printed copy. And because we're a bunch of software engineers in San Francisco, we decided that nobody printed anymore. We're like, oh, everybody just looks at their apps. Come on, it's 2010. Who prints? The answer is a lot of people still printed. So we had gutted the old code and thrown it away, and we got a lot of angry support calls of the 10% of people who still printed really liked printing. So if you ever have a risky feature, a good way is to A/B test it and see if people actually are more in favor of one or the other. A question I sometimes get asked here is, does this mean that I have to A/B test everything? No. I mean, there's some best practices out there that you should just say, okay, we're moving from a radio button to drop down or vice versa. This is a decision that we're making. You do not have to A/B test everything that you ever build to have a successful software practice. I would advise you, though, to think about it. What are the risks of going forward with this? Do we need a fallback? And do that in a graceful way. It does not mean that, again, that like for everything that you ship out that you have to have stringent tests. You just can't test everything with an A/B test. But you should know if you want to do that, instead of just having a, well, we know what's best, or we need to test everything mindset. Maintenance. This is Stephen Kennedy. He's the treasurer of Australia. Maintenance, I'd say, is somewhat of a neglected phase in tech talks. I'd say that because a lot of the excitement is around building features. It's really fun when you've built something, you get to show it to people, you get to launch it, you get all the feedback. Maintenance is actually pretty much the longest phase that most features are in. This is a phase where people think, do I need feature flags? And my first answer is yes and no. In the maintenance phase, you should have a good idea of how people are using your products. If you're still A/B testing something, you're not yet in maintenance, you're still testing. Maintenance, though, is when you can really utilize feature flags for fail-safes. So for example, if you have a system where you're worried about a lot of load, where you're worried about spikes, you might want to have a feature flag so that you can throttle traffic. So some real-world examples of where you might have sudden spikes is, for example, if you're a gambling company and you have a big sporting event. If you're a financial institution and you have some big financial event happening. With a feature flag, you can throttle traffic. And what I mean by this is you can either block certain IPs, you can throttle requests, and then you can give a better experience rather than just having something collapse. So again, a real-world example of this is Delta Airlines. So Delta Airlines in the CrowdStrike issue had a real problem getting their crew management software back online. Again, this is what I know from reading what's public. I don't claim to have any inside knowledge of Delta. When the CrowdStrike incident happened, a lot of airlines worldwide went down because their crew management systems were depending on CrowdStrike. So crew management systems are basically figuring out what planes and what crews should be where when. Once you get beyond a certain size, you can no longer keep this on a Kanban board. You can't even keep it on a spreadsheet. You need an actual system. A lot of other airlines got up very quickly. I say very quickly, within days. Delta took much longer and is now suing CrowdStrike for the outage. What's really interesting about this is that CrowdStrike has fired back because the systems that Delta that were impacted weren't even using CrowdStrike. The systems at Delta were down because they were getting erroneous information repeatedly as CrowdStrike systems were trying to get back online. So basically, they were getting a denial of service from their own internal systems who are sending them information over and over and over and over again. With the use of feature flags and maintenance, Delta could have throttled the incoming traffic or just turned off certain systems and saying, hey, we're not going to pay attention to your traffic anymore, and come back in a much more stable fashion. So maintenance is a really good time also to think about whether you want to partition users off into different cohorts or bases long term. For example, if you have a regulated industry where you have different GOs with different rules about even who could see such features, you can manage that with a feature management system. An example is BMW, which sells cars worldwide. In some geos of the world, you cannot do a remote start of a car for pollution laws. In other geos, this is an extremely popular feature because it gets quite cold in Canada. So again, this is something that you could gate with a feature flag even long after the feature is live. The final way to use a feature flag is sunset. You've built the feature, it's been in production, and now it's time for the last scene of all that ends this strange eventful history, which is EOL, end of life. And this is actually, again, something that I think a productive software org should eagerly be thinking about. If you have a code base that's around for a year, 2 years, you might have a manageable number of lines of code. If you've been in production for 5, 10, 15, 20, and I've visited people who have 30 or 40-year-old systems, you have a lot of code. And the person who worked on that might have long since moved on. It might be in a language that nobody really understands. It could be in a language that's not very well documented. It could be a language that it's hard to hire people to work on. You, in 20 years, are going to be that person that's moved on. I'm just saying that. I feel bad about some of the Java stuff that I did before. Just saying. So with feature flags, the part one is if you've used them correctly, you'll be looking at your usage all along, and you will realize that, hey, we have this feature that nobody is using anymore. And it could be that, it's time for a revamp of this feature and it's a valuable feature. Or it could just be that this is not something that people really need anymore. I talked to one financial institution that had built some stuff for their investment advisors 20 years ago and realized that the way they had built some of this stuff, just nobody used anymore. Nobody was using it at all. And there was like 5% of the app that was actually used and 95% that was not used. So instead of rebuilding 100%, they said, okay, let's take that 5% and keep it and end of life the other 95%. So the first way is if you've used feature flags at the beginning, this is very simple. You simply remove everything wrapped in that feature flag. The second way you could do it is to retrofit feature flags. And I'd say use this carefully and with making sure that everybody knows what's happening. You can start to wrap stuff with a feature flag and very carefully turn it off. And I say use this one with caution because you want to make sure that your support team knows about it. You want to make sure that your boss knows about it. Your boss's boss also knows about it, by the way. But it is kind of a neat hack because you could turn off a pretty big swath of code and see if anybody notices. And see if anybody notices for over a certain amount of time. And then if nobody notices, you could say, OK, we understand what this code did. It's not used by anybody. Let's pull it out. And then you can actually celebrate, because less code is good code. You don't have a risk that this code is going to cause a security issue, is going to cause a performance issue. It's gone, and you have more control over what's left. Again, do not do this willy-nilly. Make really sure that this is what we think is obsolete code, and we're doing this carefully. A bad way to do this, and this is not a LaunchDarkly customer, is they had an old feature flag that nobody knew about it, and somebody hit it, and suddenly half their website was offline. Don't do this. Have a good understanding of what you're doing. So from all of this, I hope you've taken away some useful patterns. I hope you've realized that feature flags aren't just A/B testing, they're not just on/off, that there's a lot of different ways you could use them within your own development processes. And that without feature flags, you're kind of left, I'd say, with these really, really long release cycles. So I talked a lot about how you should be exposing features to different constituents very early. And this is just to get continual feedback about the utility of it. If you get feedback early on that, hang on, this isn't really what we need to build, we want to build this other thing, it's much better to get that early than late. Nobody wants to spend 2 years building something that absolutely nobody wants. That's really debilitating. Again, I talked about this before. This continual practice of showing features early allows you to continue to incorporate feedback. And because you're, again, getting feedback throughout it, there should be less risk. I used to do what I called push and pray releases. They were really painful because I always call them push and pray because you pushed out a feature and then you prayed. You prayed that nothing broke. And when it did, you were scrambling, which leads to the scramble. I won't ask people to raise their hands, but everybody has gone through a bad release. Yeah. And the worst part about a bad release is when it's out in the field, everything has more pressure. All of a sudden you're like, what went wrong? Who did it? How can we fix it? And this is all in real time. And you're scrambling to figure out it all, and you suddenly discover that the one person who actually did this, is off camping without cell phone service. With feature flags and feature management, you can turn stuff off and then figure it out at your own speed. This, at least in my talking to different companies, just really increases productivity and decreases strife because there's less finger pointing, and we're just, okay, what went wrong? Let's fix it, and let's do it in a rational way. And again, this leads to reduced downtime because instead of an error being very public, of we're down, we don't know why, we're updating our stat, you could just say, okay, this feature is not working. Let's gracefully retract it and figure out what's going on while the rest of the system is performing normally. So I'll put in a couple quick plugs for AI. This whole talk is not about AI very deliberately because it's about software best practices. But I will say AI really fits very nicely into a couple of these areas. If you are testing different AI systems, which we do have different people, sometimes financial, sometimes not, you can use feature flags to switch back and forth between the two. So for example, if you're incorporating LLMs, sometimes people are actually doing multiple, you can use this to see which is giving better results. If you have an AI team internally who's doing different versions of AI, you can again use feature flagging to switch back and forth between the different versions. So this is a good way to gate your own customers' exposure and to see what's really happening. Another way that you can use AI is when you're rolling out features. I talked before about monitoring external systems. You can have this be a manual step of one person is looking at external systems, then turning stuff off. You could also have AI which will monitor them for you, and if certain thresholds are hit, if you are confident, you can just have the AI roll it back. If you like manual intervention, you can still have the AI alert somebody that, hey, something has spiked, do something. Again, for this one, I'd say I'm trying not to be prescriptive, but more descriptive in terms of whatever your organization is comfortable with in terms of your own exposure to AI is what you should be doing. So I hope the takeaways you have from this are that you should, I hope, be using feature flags pretty regularly, that they could fit into different organizations, whether you be a startup or a big enterprise. And also, feature management could just help you. With that, I'm happy to take some questions.